Anne Boleyn spent 6 years doing something almost no woman had ever done to an English king. She refused him. Many women at court had no choice when a monarch turned his attention toward them, but she held her ground. Henry VIII pursued her across the court through the late 1520s. Court correspondence from the archives shows the king pleading, flattering and promising favors. One letter, preserved in the Vatican archives, shows Henry calling her the mistress of his heart. She did not surrender easily. Observers at court noticed that difference immediately. She refused to become another quiet companion in the background. She demanded a marriage contract. That demand changed England. The king separated from Catherine of Aragon. Parliament passed laws breaking with the authority of Rome. Church property shifted, and the religious life of the country changed. Bishops swore loyalty to the king instead of the papacy. In June 1533, she walked into Westminster Abbey and received a crown. Her coronation moved through the streets of London with music, banners, and gold cloth. London officials documented arches built along the procession route. Writers recorded speeches praising the new queen. The ceremony lasted hours. Foreign reports described her influence in religious reform and court politics. Her family rose with her. Her brother George Boleyn became Viscount Rochford. Her father gained titles and estates. The Boleyn family stood at the height of power. She gave the king a daughter that same year. The king expected a son, but instead he received a girl. The disappointment appeared quietly in letters from the period. For 3 years, she carried the weight of that crown. She navigated rivalries, argued policy with ambassadors, and pushed Henry to support religious reform. Then everything collapsed in the space of a few weeks. In May 1536, she was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. The royal government accused her of crimes against the king. The charges claimed affairs with several men, including her brother George, accusations that shocked the court. The legal process moved with extraordinary speed. Arrests occurred early in the month, trials followed within days. On May 15, 1536, she stood before a jury of nobles inside the tower. Nobles gathered in the hall to judge her. She denied the accusations in court. Witness testimony described her speaking calmly and clearly. Modern scholars often point out the lack of convincing evidence supporting those charges. The Tudor court did not require modern standards of proof. Once the king turned against her, the machinery of the court moved quickly. The verdict followed the king's expectations. The court declared her guilty of treason. The sentence meant a tragic end. 3 years after receiving a crown, she sat in a small room inside the fortress waiting to die. The accepted history often presents her fall as a grim tragedy where a frightened woman faced the end with despair. The unsealed documents tell a different story. Sir William Kingston served as Constable of the Tower of London. His duty placed him directly responsible for her during imprisonment. He wrote letters reporting her behavior to Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister. Those letters survived. They show a queen facing her final days with jokes. Kingston described her in careful detail because he reported directly to the man managing the political crisis. One line from his report shows she spoke in the most merry and pleasant fashion. That phrase appears in one of the letters preserved in historical collections of Tudor documents. The woman inside the tower did not behave like someone defeated. She talked, she laughed, she made jokes about her own fatal sentence. Kingston wrote down her words because they did not match the behavior expected from someone in her position. Most prisoners awaiting their sentence showed fear or quiet resignation. She moved between laughter and distress. One report mentions her expressing despair over the accusations, while another describes her suddenly cheerful again. She joked about the skill of the French specialist brought to carry out the act. She placed her hands around her neck and joked about its small size. The remark stunned the people around her. Another line recorded by Kingston appears in several historical accounts. She laughed when she called herself Queen Anne without a head. Kingston wrote that the remark amused her greatly. The constable's letters became part of the historical archive describing her final days. The letters provide the closest account historians have of her final hours. They also uncover that she understood every word she spoke might be repeated outside the walls. The attendants around her would eventually leave the fortress. Their stories would spread through the court and across London. Her jokes may have served more than one purpose. They lightened the mood inside the room. They also created a narrative about how she faced the end. The government carefully controlled the information leaving the tower. Her words passed through a chain before reaching the outside world. Kingston wrote that she appeared more ready to die than any creature he ever saw. Those lines appear in his correspondence describing her final preparation. He was a prison official reporting behavior, not a court poet trying to create a heroic image. The reports describe how she spent her last hours in prayer, confession, and receiving the sacrament. These acts formed the preparation for what people called a good death. A good death meant facing the end with faith, confession, and spiritual readiness. She spoke openly about trusting God with her fate. During her imprisonment, Kingston recorded moments of emotional collapse. Hope appeared and disappeared repeatedly. Then, that hope faded. The weeks before that morning had drained her emotionally and physically. Arrest, interrogation, trial, and imprisonment created constant uncertainty. When that uncertainty ended with the final sentence, the tension disappeared as well. Several accounts describe her speaking about relief that the waiting would soon end. She saw the final moment as the conclusion of suffering rather than its beginning. Kingston recorded her saying she would soon be past her pain. A series of documents written during her imprisonment reveal that she negotiated the terms of her own final moment. She did not want the traditional English method used for noble prisoners. She wanted a swordsman. The English method used an axe. Chroniclers recorded several cases where the axe failed on the first attempt. The continental method used a sword. The condemned person knelt upright rather than bending over a block. The blade passed cleanly across the neck in one motion. As a young woman, she had served in the household of Queen Claude in France, where she absorbed court culture. She carried those memories into her final days. Henry VIII agreed to the request. The crown arranged for a specialist from Calais. A messenger had to travel from England to Calais, and the swordsman then had to cross the channel. That journey explains the delay between the verdict and the final act. The event originally scheduled for May 18th changed at the last moment. She waited an extra day. Waiting can intensify fear, but the reports show her using the moment differently. She spoke calmly about the skill of the executioner. One comment from that morning has echoed through history. "I heard say, the executioner was very good, and I have a little neck." By dawn on May 19th, preparations inside the tower had finished. A small platform had been constructed inside the grounds near the chapel of St. Peter at Vincula. The location allowed a limited audience rather than a large public crowd. Witnesses gathered nearby to observe the final moment. She walked to the platform dressed carefully for the occasion. She wore a dark gown with a hood trimmed with fur. People expected anger, protests, and accusations. Instead, she began with words that stunned the witnesses. She addressed the crowd before the sentence was carried out. "I am come hither to accuse no man," she said. She continued, "nor to speak anything of that, whereof I am accused and condemned to die." She did not accuse Thomas Cromwell. She did not accuse Henry VIII. She praised the king. Witnesses recorded her calling Henry a gentle and sovereign lord. A surviving version of the speech, preserved by Tudor chroniclers, contains the line repeated by historians ever since. "I pray, God save the king and send him long to reign over you." The standard history often describes this moment as loyalty. The documents show a very different story. She was following a rule. Execution speeches during the 16th century followed a strict formula. Surviving transcripts from many similar events show the same mechanism repeating again and again. Criticizing the monarch on a scaffold could bring severe consequences even after death. Families of condemned nobles often suffered loss of property or punishment if authorities believed a prisoner challenged the crown. She still had a daughter. Elizabeth was only 2 years old in 1536. Any speech that openly attacked the king might have placed the girl in even greater danger. Records from the period show that she maintained her innocence in private during her imprisonment. Witness accounts describe her denying the accusations repeatedly during conversations in the tower. Private conversations allowed personal statements. Public speeches followed ritual. The speech heard by the crowd was not a legal defense. It was a religious performance. She asked the crowd to pray for the king and avoided the accusations completely. In doing so, she followed the expected form of a noble death. She removed the charges from her own voice entirely. After finishing the speech, she knelt. Her ladies removed the headdress covering her hair. A blindfold covered her eyes. She waited. No one told her exactly when the blade would fall. The scene was not calm and ceremonial. It was tense, uncertain, and deeply human. The French method required the condemned person to kneel facing forward while the executioner moved into position. The victim could not see the weapon, only hear the moment. Witnesses noticed her reacting to that silence. She turned her head slightly more than once. She seemed to glance behind her shoulder. The movement was small, but clear enough that observers remembered it. She continued to pray. Accounts record her whispering familiar words, repeating, "Lord Jesus, receive my soul." The waiting creates tension. The body's natural reaction to fear may have taken over. Modern observers call it hypervigilance. The mind listens for danger, and every sound becomes important. She could hear the crowd and the movement of people around her, but she could not see the weapon. The queen who had faced the king himself now waited for a blow from behind. Instinct told her to look. The executioner used a distraction. Sources describe him calling loudly for his assistant to bring the blade. "Bring me the sword," he shouted. The words made her turn her attention away from the direction of the strike. The assistant did not actually bring the weapon because the swordsman already had it. Witnesses later explained that the weapon had been hidden in straw near the scaffold. The call shifted her attention for a moment. That moment allowed the swordsman to perform the strike without warning. Witnesses wrote that the act ended instantly. The entire moment passed in seconds. She was 35 years old. Henry VIII did not simply remove her. He tried to erase her. On May 17, 1536, just days after the trial, a legal judgment declared that the king's marriage to her had never been valid. The ruling stated that the union had been void from the beginning. If the marriage never existed, she had never truly been queen. Elizabeth lost her claim to legitimacy. Documents from the Tudor court show changes inside royal residences soon after the downfall. Her apartments at Greenwich Palace and Whitehall Palace were stripped of the symbols that marked her queenship. Decorative badges associated with her were removed. Her emblem included a crowned falcon holding a scepter. After May 1536, that emblem began disappearing from royal spaces. The strategy resembled an ancient practice historians sometimes compare to damnatio memoriae. The phrase comes from Roman history, describing the removal of a person's memory from public life after disgrace. Remove the symbols. Remove the titles. Remove the memory. The king's authority made the transformation possible. Courtiers followed the signal quickly. The king needed the kingdom to believe his new marriage carried legitimate authority. Allowing sympathy for her could threaten that stability. Records about Elizabeth show the next step. The girl born in 1533 lost the title of princess. Official documents began calling her Lady Elizabeth. Mentioning her name carried risk. Silence spread. The erasure extended to her remains. When the government carried out the sentence, officials had not arranged a coffin. The government had declared her a traitor. That single word stripped away every privilege connected to her position as queen. It erased the ceremonial honors normally given to members of the royal family. When the sentence ended, the women attending her faced an unexpected problem. They had a body, but they had nothing to place it in. Inside the tower complex stood storage buildings holding equipment used by the garrison. Among those supplies were wooden chests designed to hold arrows. One of those chests became the coffin. Accounts written later in the century describe the scene in stark terms. Her ladies wrapped the body in a sheet and placed it inside the wooden arrow chest. The container was too short. The body had to be positioned awkwardly inside the box. Her head was placed alongside the body rather than in the expected position. The burial took place quickly beneath the chancel area of the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the tower. The grave carried no marker. No stone bearing her name identified the location. More than 300 years passed before investigators examined the site carefully. In 1876, officials carried out restoration work inside the chapel. Workers opened sections of the floor beneath the chancel. Human remains appeared beneath the stones, and one set matched the expected age and build. Anne Boleyn spent 6 years demanding a crown. She produced the child who would later rule the country for decades. She forced a king to change the laws of his own church to marry her. The system answered by declaring her a traitor within days. She gave her reputation, her family, and her life to a court that replaced her within a week. She waited on a scaffold, glancing over her shoulder for a blade she could not see. When the institution moved on, it took down her symbols from the walls and buried her quietly in a wooden box meant for arrows. If you have ever given everything to people who change the rules when you stop serving their needs, the historical archives show exactly how that mechanism operates.